Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Blue Raider Podcast, hosted by Jake Bolden and presented by the Conseco Group General Contracting and Mighty Dog Roofing. Don't miss another Tuesday episode by subscribing to the podcast on all streaming platforms or catch our visual presentation uploaded every week on YouTube. Don't miss our next ticket giveaways by subscribing and following on all Blue Raider Podcast social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Blue Raider Pod. Welcome back to the Blue Raider Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Bolden. Today's episode, we are going to be recapping this last weekend at the Myrtle Beach Invitational, where the men's basketball team had a rather impressive performance, albeit a second place finish there at Coastal Carolina University. So joining us today is going to be Oliver Blatz, the basketball analyst from GoMiddle.com, to break down everything that happened this last weekend, as well as a look ahead to the non-conference schedule coming up in December. Unfortunately, as I promised last week, our player interview of this week would be Jalen Counter, but those that watched basketball this last week know that Jalen suffered an injury in Friday night's basketball game against South Florida, so he unfortunately will not be able to make the episode this week. However, I will promise and I will deliver, so Jalen Counter will be on next week's episode, so stay tuned for that, but don't miss on all the basketball talk I have today with Oliver Blatz. Of course, we'll go behind enemy lines with one of our Conference USA Roundtable and College Huddle members, Jake Gibson of the Paws Up Podcast, to preview this Saturday's regular season finale with the FIU Panthers. And of course, the Raider wrap-up portion at the end of the episode. But as always, I'd like to take just a second to do an ad read for today's sponsor, and we'll start off with the Conseco Group. Since 1987, the Conseco Group has been turning dreams into reality, whether it's pre-construction consulting, construction management, design build, or renovations and improvements. We're here to exceed your expectations. At Conseco Group, we don't just deliver, we deliver with passion, precision, and unparalleled quality. Our hands-on approach ensures your investment is maximized and your vision is brought to life. From Clarksville all the way down to Columbia and beyond, trust the Conseco Group to handle every detail with expertise and care. If you're ready to build your future, contact the Conseco Group today, 615-298-9907, or visit their website at consecogroup.com. And of course, thank you to Mighty Dog Roofing of Nashville East. When it comes to your home, trust Mighty Dog Nashville East for all your needs. As a veteran and locally owned business, we're honored to be one of just 11 Owens Corning contractors nationwide to win their prestigious service award. From roofing and gutters to windows and siding, our expert team delivers top quality craftsmanship and unmatched service. We're here to protect your home with pride and precision. Choose Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East, where excellence is a tradition. Call them today at 615-MD-ROOFS, that's ROOFS, or visit their website at mightydog.roofing.com to get a free quote today. Again, thanks to the Conseco Group and Mighty Dog Roofing Nashville East. Now, it is time to get into our first guest of today, and that is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, our GoMiddle.com basketball analyst, Oliver Baltz. Oliver, how's it going?
Jake, it's going great. Greatest time of the year for me, at least. College basketball all day, every day. These holiday tournaments have been great. Obviously great showing for the Blue Raiders, but really just everywhere, and I'm basking in it.
This is always my favorite time of the year. Obviously, football is winding down. I wish the Blue Raiders, we had a lot more to talk about with them, but unfortunately we don't. But there's so much football on this Saturday. You've got the Maui Invitational that started Monday night. So much good basketball. Anything? I know we just watched the Raiders this last week, and before we really deep dive into any of that, is there kind of any tournaments that you have your attention on this week?
Yeah, I mean, Maui is huge. I mean, you have it's somehow Iowa State and Auburn is a first round matchup. Who knows why that is? But I mean, two of the best teams in the world. We just saw Connecticut got beat by Memphis earlier. That's huge. I mean, it's the nature of the beast. And I mean, UConn is obviously they go without saying how great they've built their program the last couple of years, and it's. You never know. I mean, there's been a little less hype on them, obviously, but I guess entering each of their last two national championship seasons, there wasn't a lot of, okay, they're going to be a monster. They're going to run away with the tournament, as they actually ended up doing. Kind of had that same wondering this year, and I'd say they're showing against Memphis today, at least pumps a little brakes in any sort of that speculation. But yeah, it's still just November basketball. Everybody's got a lot better, a lot more time to get better until March, and but still, I feel like what's great about college basketball right now is there's a lot more competitive games that's happened in the last couple of years that in this kind of time period of November and December that hasn't been as often as years past. So it's been a great first 4 weeks of the season. I couldn't be happier with it.
Yeah, there's so much parity at this time of year, and as you kind of touched on it there, we experienced this with MTSU's situation this last weekend at the Myrtle Beach Invitational. You've got a lot of teams that are on that same plane in regards to competitive level, and if we want to steer this conversation over to the Blue Raiders a little bit here, when you talk about the field that they played in, I know going into the schedule, maybe this wasn't a tournament that stood out at you at first, but when you look at the level of competition that the Raiders, not only the MTSU faced, but what the field had together. I mean, Princeton, who in my eyes was going to be the second place team in that tournament, finished in seventh place. I mean, and we came out in second place. And so that just speaks to the volume of talent there. And even the lowest ranked team in the tournament, Portland, who did end up finishing in eighth place, they just took Oregon. Was it Oregon that they took them, wire to wire just last week prior to going to the Myrtle Beach Invitational? So the talent was there all across the board in that Myrtle Beach Invitational. So I'm excited really to dive in to what we saw this last week. Going into the Ohio matchup, it wasn't really a matchup I was super ecstatic about. I know you kind of were in that boat as we were chatting it up at gomiddle.com on the forums there, which if you're listening to this, you're not already over there, go over there, check us out. We've got tons of scouting information on every game as it comes to us. But that Ohio matchup was intriguing because, one, they're the MAC favorites. They've been underperforming, and I think you and I were operating that at some point this team has got to get their season on track. And what a better time than at the Myrtle Beach Invitational against MTSU, who just came off of their beatdown against Murray State. And we had our ebbs and flows in that game, but, hats off to them fighting their tails off. Kamari lands with a huge three at the end of regulation to push that into overtime. And, I thought getting to overtime in itself was a win just because of the amount of foul trouble that Ohio was in. But gosh, what a gutsy performance that was, because there were so many opportunities in that game where, as I've said in previous wins already, they could have folded and they didn't. And hats off to that team, the maturity that team has to get it done when it matters. And again, advance. And I'm sure we'll have our opportunity to break down each one of these games, but getting that Ohio win in and of itself, I thought was a win for the tournament. And obviously their showing against South Florida was impressive. And I'm actually pretty ecstatic with how the Bradley game turned out for the same reason that the Murray State game went bad, and the fact that they didn't keel over. They faced a really hot shooting Bradley team, as we thought they would, but they were in it. They had an opportunity to at least cut it down into single possessions there with 2 minutes left, and just had an unfortunate swing of events. But collectively for the tournament, I was ecstatic with the outcome, 2-1, and they weren't the 2 wins that I thought they'd get, but beating Ohio and South Florida, I think when all things are said and done, are going to look pretty good on a resume. Not that this league is too big yet, but I think getting 2 wins is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, how you win and how you lose matters. I know when you look at it in retrospect, I mean, so much of this sport is based on, resumes and who beat when, and, one loss. Nobody's going to be thinking about winning by 1 point when it's 2 months later, yada, yada. But I mean, at least in the moment, winning, the way you win, the way you lose matters. And the way they just steamrolled South Florida to start the first half, the way they kind of, it's more kind of indicative to your confidence towards the team than just a 7-point overall margin of victory that they had against South Florida. And it goes the same way with Bradley. They lost by 11 points to Bradley, but if you have the context of who Bradley is, how well they've been playing, the fact that all their players have played for Bradley for a significant amount of time, and it was a lot closer of a game than the margin really suggested. I mean, the Blue Raiders really hung tough. And not to skip ahead, but it all starts with Ohio too. And it almost reminded me a little bit of Florida Atlantic's run in the Final Four. It might be a little silly to compare a Final Four magical Cinderella run to a runner-up in a MTE, but Middle is down for most of the Ohio game. I don't think they had a lead in the final 60 minutes of regulation whatsoever. They hit that game tying shot with 4 seconds left, and they grind away to a victory. And it reminded me of Florida Atlantic in the regards of Florida Atlantic only beat Memphis by 1 in that round of 64. That is a 1-point game is nothing. It could be completely changed by just the luck of where a ball bounces. It's kind of what makes this sport great. I don't want to. Luck is probably the wrong word, but there is a solid level of chance and fate that kind of goes into every game, and even if it has nothing to do with your process, it has everything to do with the result, and results are contagious. And you just wonder, does Middle Tennessee blow the doors off of South Florida in the first half if they don't get that? Obviously, they don't play South Florida if they don't beat Ohio, but if they end up losing to Ohio in overtime or in regulation, how does that affect them in the next game? Do they have as promising performances in the following 2 games? So it's just cool how these sort of Middle had a really, really good tournament, I thought. Props to them, but it's just interesting. I think that's the beauty of the game, is how their talent paired with a little bit of chance, and how that kind of sequences into what becomes, if you will.
Yeah, we talk about too we'll go into the South Florida game a little bit too. One thing that I think we spoke about on the boards as well, and in private, was one, how does this team play with the lead? That was kind of the first time this season we've seen them jump out to. They dropped 50 points on the American Athletic Conference regular season champions last year, and albeit it's not the same team, and their coach unfortunately passed away 2 weeks prior to the season beginning, so we knew we might get a different look of South Florida, but that was still a well put together team, as we saw. They ended up going on and getting 3rd place in the tournament. So all things considered, that was an impressive start. But how did they look when they were winning by 20? First time we've seen that this year, and things got scary, and it got scary quick. They rolled off. I think in an 8-minute span, they had 11 free throws made, which is that's how you cut into a 20-point lead. Is you get to the free throw line and you knock them down, and that's what South Florida did. The thing that was very promising to me is, one, they never relinquished the lead, albeit there was moments at times where we thought that it was going to get out of hand, and maybe it was a little bit of PTSD from years past, but they kept at it. They chipped away when they could. They made the right plays. The turnovers weren't necessarily out of hand. They did get out of hand. Maybe it was all perception. I know that a lot of us on the boards were concerned about Weston and how he handled some of the pressure that South Florida had. But with Jalen Counter going out earlier in that game on Friday, you were left without a point guard. And again, maybe last year was the blessing in disguise for JP's game, because McDevitt rolled him over for 10 of the last 12 minutes to play point guard. And I thought for the most part, he did a relatively good job. As good as you would expect a shooting guard to do, as he did last year. But he didn't turn over the ball too much. I think he had maybe 2 turnovers in that last 12-minute span. But for him, the thing that I think really took us out of our game late was the fact that the offense had to run through JP. And when the ball doesn't run through JP, and the fact that he doesn't bring it up the half-court line, but if we find ways to get him the ball without the ball, and he's able to, I'll say improvise, but that's not really the game plan. The game plan is to free him up at the free throw line and get downhill, get to the basket, and then he does this amazing suspension where he seems like he's floating in thin air, can shoot it over anyone, and he did that a lot. He scored 50 points in the first 2 games, and was held to 8 against Bradley, which again is probably a little bit of the difference maker, where Bradley was really shutting down that dribble handoff that we were doing to get JP the ball. But again, talk about the versatility of this team, with Weston having to sit the bench for those 10 minutes, with Jalen out, which thankfully, I don't think I'm breaking any news here, but it sounds like Jalen is going to be day to day. I think everything is fine. I don't want to say that, everything's perfect and it'll never happen again, but he's fine. He's rested up. He's expected to be back this next week, whether that's UAB on Sunday or the game after on Wednesday against Rhodes. I don't know. But things are okay. And obviously next week's episode, we'll have a little bit more insight from the man himself. But all things considered, I just like how the different situations we got put into this weekend in general. Like I said, with the Ohio game, you're behind the whole game, you battled back, you got to win in overtime. Then Friday against South Florida, you're up by 20. You had to fight off a storming team that you thought for sure was going to come back, and you never gave it up. And then on Sunday, gosh, Bradley just couldn't miss. And the scout that I had wrote, I said it's not going to matter how well we shoot the ball, because Bradley's just that good. And we saw how good Bradley is. They just couldn't miss. And there was a lot of uncontested threes that really start to bite us. Duke Dean there's a reason he's the Missouri Valley preseason player of the year. That guy, he's just a special talent.
He's pretty good.
He showed it. That's absolutely right. And so, all things considered, I was still pleased. And if you break down the film of the ending to that Bradley game, I always think to myself, what could have happened differently? You're down by 5 with about 2.5 minutes to go. You go down, and we get, I believe we get an unforced shot by either Esam that takes an unwise shot, tries to force the issue. Duke Dean runs it down in transition and hits a 3. And then just like that, what could have been a 3-point game is now an 8-point game. And then the game was pretty much out of reach at the 2-minute mark. So it really does come down to maybe making a few smarter plays on the offensive end. But I'll steer this conversation to what I collectively learned this last week, or what maybe my concerns are, since I've been so positive thus far. This is the 4th straight game the Raiders have allowed 80 points. Going back to last season when the offense couldn't score, our bread and butter was playing defense. We were one of the better defensive teams in the conference. We thought, maybe to win games, we'd have to get into these rock fights, and be in the low 50s and 60s. But this offense is very capable of scoring. But I am concerned, albeit we've played really good teams the last 4 games, but 80 points per contest in the last 4 is a little bit concerning. And do you feel the same, or do you think the offense is good enough that when we play this better competition, it shouldn't come to be an issue? Where's your head at with that, Oliver?
No, it's a good question. It's fair. I mean, I guess biased wise, I'd rather be a good offensive team than a good defensive team, and I have no actual basketball philosophical reason behind that, other than I'm just selfish as a fan, and I want to watch more aesthetically pleasing ball. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I don't know if Nick made the conscious decision as I'm going to focus less on defense, get better on offense. I don't know if it was that general, but definitely the way he built this roster, I think he could have probably expected those results to happen. I mean, I was looking at some numbers. They have a offensive rating of 98 or more this season in every single game. Last year, they had 18 of their 33 games. So 18, over half of their games were below that 98 offensive rating. They've had 5 games with 79 or more. They only had 4 games all of last year with that total. So, yeah, I mean, I think you take the good with the bad. I think that, the defense is a concern. I think that you just kind of take the results as is, though. I mean, they beat 2 impressive teams. They hung with a very impressive team in the last game. I do think the defense needs some work, and I think it'll kind of come down to McDevitt and his lineups, and we can get to that in a minute. But I think you kind of graciously are happy with where the offense is, considering where the offense has been maybe the last couple of years, or even if you look back through the entirety of Nick's tenure. I think in 21-22 we had a pretty good offensive team, but outside of that, it's never really been anything to write home about, and sometimes it's even been abominably bad. So yeah, I think at the very least, we should be very optimistic about where the offense is this early. I mean, it's a brand new team, a lot of new pieces, even some of the older players, or I guess the incumbents, the players that are returning. The returning players would be the best way to put it. That came from last year's squad, like Loof and Alston. I mean, they're playing in brand new roles. So it's a work in progress, but the fact that they're this good offensively already, I definitely think you should take that as a good sign. With each of these games, I mean, like you said, I think the main thing outside of actual basketball reasons like shooting or scoring or defense or whatever. The fact that this team was resilient as they were throughout the entire 3-game stretch is pretty impressive. And yeah, they did get rattled at the end of the Bradley game. I think it was just kind of finally that time for them to get rattled. And you put it well. They just took some bad shots, and the entire second half they had pretty questionable shot selection. But at the end of the day, they were down 13-15, and they brought it back to 5. I mean, it's really impressive against as good of a team as Bradley is. Like you said, they were resilient in different fashions in every single game, with being down the entire Ohio game, but not giving up and just understanding how much time they had left to make a run. And the exact opposite in the South Florida game, just being up and knowing that a run is going to come, but just making sure you have a counter punch and not letting them get all the way back. And then, just hanging tough with Bradley is as good as a team that they might see all year. Again, this team isn't perfect. There's definitely things that they need to get better at. I think that's more than expected based on how they are put together, how many new players there are on the roster, and I definitely think you hang your hat on the good things that you've seen so far.
Did you know the Blue Raider Podcast has an online store? You can now support your favorite podcast by checking out our selection at our website, blueraiderpodcast.com. And stay tuned for new merchandise releases as we collaborate with athletes in NIL partnerships.
Well, one thing about this last weekend, just talk a little bit about the depth of this team. I think we learned a lot about it. I know Esam a little dreary about his game with Murray State and how he defended. We kind of thought we might see some more glimpses of that. I thought he did fairly well, but obviously where he was on the offensive end, where he is on the rebounding glass, kind of makes up for maybe the lack of defense that he does have. But to talk about the depth, I thought Chris Loof was exceptional in the game against Bradley, especially at moments when we needed him. Double-digit score, had some big blocks. Sometimes he's still getting beat. He's still getting beat to the spot on the defensive side of things, but for the most part, he's quick to recover. I thought the rotation in a lot of situations were good to help him out, but he doesn't look as lost on the offensive end, and that's very promising to me. And then another guy, too, that I really, really liked is Torrey Alston. He's only getting so few minutes on a nightly basis, and I believe the stat was brought up today by the Blue Raider stat handle on Twitter/X today, was that he is one of the top rebounders per 40 minutes in the entire country. And this is a guy that doesn't get very many minutes. So if he were to play 40 minutes on a night, I think his average was like almost 12 rebounds a night. And I know that you had a very smart man wrote that he is very comparable to that of T. Leonard. And we saw some glimpses of that. I mean, he was a high riser there in that Ohio game. But I really like Torrey Alston's game. He's a guy that I think is going to take more and more strides as the season goes on. And I know Nick had kind of teased that off the record at the beginning of the season, but we're kind of seeing that come to fruition. Justin Buford, a guy that you and I had agreed upon that he's got to shoot the 3 ball better. And this weekend he did that. Now, again, how much is that just a one small sample size? Because he also started the year shooting it bad, but he's shooting it more to average now. So, again, maybe we can find some consistency there. But up and down the roster, I think a lot of guys are playing at or above expectations. And maybe I say Esam, I wouldn't say he's playing above expectation, but he is who we thought he was, which is a very good player, very good rebounder. He's obviously he's a lot better around the rim than I even gave him credit for. I think he's a lot more crafty than I thought. So, but anyways, I could go on and on about all these guys, but I was impressed with that handful of guys. But I'm interested to hear your takeaway, because again, as someone who's maybe not as an emotional take as I am, who are some guys that objectively you think looked really good this last weekend?
Oh, trust me, I was screaming plenty when Kamari hit that game tying 3. No, so I think you put it well. I think it really just comes down to their depth. I mean, this might be it's Nick's big splash here is obviously the 21-22 team. I think the depth might be even better than that year. I mean, you have Alston off the bench. You have Chris Loof off the bench. You have Counter who will be coming back. You have Oglesby, who, he's a TBD as far as we're not sure how good he is at this level. In the portal, you just never really know. But, he's based on his numbers, where he's been, how long he's been doing it. I think there should be plenty of optimism. He also, he's best shooter on the team, or he's expected to be. So that fits perfectly with what they need. But yeah, the depth is really what sticks out, man. If you think about what they did in this tournament, there's kind of a different hero every game. I want to say it was Mustafa who had he had 19 in Ohio. Justin Porter was kind of a steady force in both Ohio and South Florida, as we mentioned, but Mustafa was the big hero against Ohio. Loof had an incredible game against Bradley, and it was and then they had Kamari Lands. Kamari had a great weekend. He really kind of showed what he could do for the first time, I think, at the college level after not having years that he thought he could at Louisville and Arizona State. But he had a splash. Obviously, he had the splash moment against Ohio, but following up with a 17-point game against South Florida in the next game. They just got it's a huge part of this level of basketball. There's sometimes you just kind of need a different hero every game, and Middle has that. They had counter for less than a game and a half. He's definitely capable of being a hero at some point. I think Oglesby, the expectation should he can have some hero games too. Buford, like you said, the shooting was not great at starting. It looked pretty good this past weekend, and I think more than anything, he's cutting well. He looks better attacking the basket than he ever has in his time here. So even if the shooting comes and goes, I think you can rely on him offensively a little bit more than you have in years past. So they got dudes. Kind of comparing it back to the 2021-22 team, I'm not sure they have the same type of star power. Is there a player as good as Josh Jefferson on this team? Porter would probably be the closest one. I definitely think he can be, but we'll see. Then you have Sims and Dishman. I don't know. I think what's going to really come down to this season is how Nick manages his lineup. Despite there being 8 or 9 guys who are really talented and can be the quote-unquote hero of the night, it's going to come down to Nick like pushing the right buttons, finding the right lineups, who plays best with who. And we saw it with Loof, and obviously you push the right buttons that night, but it's just you got to keep doing it every single night. It's kind of a blessing and a curse because you can't play. Mustafa and Loof might be 2 of your top 5 players, but you can never play them at the same time. So you need to kind of understand when's the best time to play Mustafa, when's the best time to play Loof, who pairs best with Oglesby. Is the best line of Oglesby and Torrey Alston, and is the best lineup with Lands, Justin Buford. So then if you come down to that conclusion, what's going to be the best game to really utilize Alston and Oglesby? What's going to be the best game to utilize Buford and Kamari Lands? So having depth is something you definitely want. It's definitely not a bad thing, but I do think the lineup and how to kind of allocate the minutes is less clear than it was in 2021, 2022. Maybe that changes along the way. They've only played 7 games, so it's very possible that there's more breakthroughs along the horizon. But as of right now, I'm really interested to see how Nick kind of finds the balance between these players and how he can squeeze the most out of each individual player and make the sum of the parts greater than the whole, as they like to say.
Yeah, especially with the wrench of Oglesby. Once you throw him into the mix, what does that game plan necessarily look like? Like, one thing I've been kind of critical on is the lack of 3-point attempts thus far in the season, significantly lower than years past for Nick McDevitt. I know, according to Ken Palm, they're nearly at 33% per actual field goal attempt, where most seasons for him are closer to that 40% mark. Not that it necessarily makes or breaks teams because of the amount of 3-pointers that they take, but it definitely helps with spacing the floor. I know you've said this too, is that becomes a struggle, especially when you're trying to get Justin down in the lane one-on-one, or you're trying to get Esam a one-on-one look at the basket on the low block. If you're not hitting threes, it allows that zone or that man coverage to overhelp on the inside. It makes things a little stuffy down there. So you've got to be able to at least open it up with the mid-range game. Obviously, if you're hitting the three, it opens it up significantly more, like we saw in the South Florida game, which is where they went off from deep. So, and they didn't have that same hit rate against Bradley. I mean, talk about Kamari Lands. He was 2 for 10. I think they were willing to kind of let him shoot the ball there later in the game. And Kamari, for the most part, had some contested shots. He was having to shoot it 3 or 4 feet past the line because they were guarding him all the way out there to the perimeter. So I think that's an interesting aspect to look at, is how this team will adapt with a more of a shooting presence that is Oglesby. Counter obviously has his. He's not going to be the 3-point threat that Cam would be, but Cam obviously has great vision at times, and then also at times he can get a little overwhelmed with the pressure. So I think 1, 2 is that McDevitt's not married to the lineup. I thought that was something that I did appreciate a little bit in the South Florida game. He had 2 quick turnovers, and when the Bulls were running their full court press, and he brought him out for 10 minutes, whether that was for an attitude or for the fact that he had 2 turnovers, because I thought 10 minutes was really excessive, but he kept him out as long as we still had the lead. He didn't seem to really push that envelope at all. So I think, again, Nick knows the weapons that he has on his bench. He's willing to utilize them as he goes. And another guy, too, Jacob Johnson, someone that hasn't necessarily played a lot of minutes early going, but in that South Florida game, he got a lot of minutes. Even in Ohio game, he got a lot of minutes. So, again, he's willing to take what the game gives him, if you will. And I think that's a part of that should be commended. I mean, obviously a guy that knows he needs to win basketball games this season, but that's all promising signs. But as we close up our conversation here, this upcoming non-conference schedule going into the season, you and I thought 8 wins is kind of the bottom line. Anything less than that is gonna be kind of hard to justify. Well, you got 2 wins at the Myrtle Beach Invitational as expected, but I would say they weren't even the wins you thought you would be getting. I thought we'd lose to Ohio. You'd pick up a win against Portland, and then maybe Texas State in the 5th place game, but you got 2nd place. But this non-conference schedule just doesn't quit, albeit people look at these names and they're not big, sexy names, Tennessee, but you've got UAB on the road this Sunday. You got Belmont that Saturday after. You got Cal Baptist coming to the building, who's still a top 180 net ranked team. So they're not nobody. And then you got Lipscomb at home as well. So fortunately you've got, Rhodes, if you want to count that game in there, but fortunately two of your final 5 Division I non-conference games are at home. But if you can steal one against UAB, if you can steal one against Belmont, that 8-win mark becomes pretty easy for you at that point. So where's your head at in regards to reaching that? I mean, at this point, if you can pick up 3 of these next, if you can pick up 3 of these next 4, I mean, 2 of the next 4, I still think is great, because that means you're getting one of these on the road. So, I'm skipping Lipscomb. If you can get 3 of the next 5, that'd be Lipscomb, Cal Baptist, and maybe you can steal one from UAB and Belmont on the road. 8 wins becomes very easy for you. So, what are your thoughts there, Oliver? Is it still feasible? Is 8 still the expectation? Should we be looking for 9 wins after the Tennessee game? What are we thinking?
Yeah, so I think it's still in line. Maybe not for the same reasons. So, I mean, I'll admit, when I first saw the schedule, I was a little underwhelmed, and a few months went on, and I think more intel came out on these teams. And now that we've even seen film on these guys, I'm pretty impressed with the non-conference schedule. I think the Blue Raider stats fellow on Twitter that you mentioned, with whatever he's running, he listed us with the 2nd best strength of schedule among the Conference USA teams, and it fits. I will say the UAB one is the main. It's the main switch. I think everybody else is a little better than I expected, especially in the Myrtle Beach Invitational. It was a better field than I expected, especially the fact that they ended up making it to the championship and playing the MVC favorite. But UAB, I mean, despite being the AAC favorite, they've had quite a stumble to begin the year. They're 3-4, and they've lost to some decent teams, but AAC is kind of the outside looking in of the high major realm, and starting 3-4 as the conference favorite is failing expectations, no matter how you slice it. So originally when I kind of made a 8-win, I don't want to say necessity, but an 8-win desire of a non-conference slate, I had kind of penciled in UAB as a scheduled loss, and it is a road game, so it'll be harder, and God knows they'll be wanting to get right after starting the season in poor form. But I don't think it's a game that Middle can't win anymore. If I'm making that clear. Lipscomb and Belmont and Cal Baptist, I think you definitely want to go 2-1 against those three. I realize Belmont and Lipscomb are both pretty good teams. Lipscomb's up at the top of the A-Sun. But it's as I kind of mentioned, Conference USA is not going to be easy. You mentioned the shooting and making sure there's space for Justin Porter and Cam Weston counter to get to the rim with their dribble drive. Like, defense is going to be a lot rockier in Conference USA with just all these athletes, and that's just not really how Belmont and Lipscomb play. So, yeah, you would hope to see them go 2-1 against those two and Cal Baptist, and again, how you win matters, and how you lose matters. I mean, if they only get 7 wins, but a few of those wins are by like 20, and 3 of their losses are by 1, that makes a big difference. If a player goes down with a torn ankle and you lose that, then it all matters. And maybe it doesn't matter at the end of the year when you're saying you're 19-14 or you're 26-11. You're not really remembering context then, but at least in the short term, context matters if you want to build momentum, build confidence. And, I think that's a big part of why Middle Tennessee, the roster, the players, the coaches should feel good about themselves. And the fans should be encouraged that they got a good team here in Murfreesboro this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, that they do. The UAB matchup this Sunday, intriguing one, as you already mentioned. They're on the road in Birmingham. They're looking to get their season right, and there'd be no better time to do that with your old Conference USA rival in your own gym. One thing about UAB, to preview that game a little bit, and they're kind of in the same boat as Ohio, not really having the season that they wanted to. They were conference favorites. They don't have an impressive win on the resume. When you look quickly, Southern Miss, Southeastern Louisiana, and then Louisiana, or as we would call Lafayette, all of them are ranked above 257 on KenPom. So really, they're all quad 4 wins. They had a rough go at the Paradise Jam right now, which to segue back to Conference USA, Liberty right now, as we're recording this, they're in the championship game against a Will Wade McNeese team, holding a slight lead late in that game. So Liberty has looked apart. They were a team that, how do they mix together with some of their new additions? And they've been just fine. They've had no issues at all putting that team together. That they look just as poised, if not the best team in Conference USA. Louisiana Tech, they're as strong as ever. I've been super impressed with what I've seen from them, but it doesn't stop. I mean, everyone outside of FIU, all in the top 200. I think all but 3 are in the top 150. This conference is good. I mean, this conference is going to stack up to be a very tough conference to win. I don't want to say you're going to have a too big league. I mean, as well as Liberty's playing, and Liberty's got a few more opportunities to really boost up a resume. They've got UT Arlington, that's at home, so not necessarily that'd be kind of their last real big potential win for them on their lineup. And then Louisiana Tech, who is currently undefeated, they've got Memphis on the road coming up. They've got Grand Canyon at home, so they could potentially put together a resume if they were to go through undefeated, and then have a good Conference USA season. So you could potentially find a 2-bid league if Louisiana Tech and Liberty finish out strong in their non-conference. Unfortunately for us, unless barring a win, we went out and you beat Tennessee, maybe you get put in that conversation, but that's pretty far-fetched in my opinion. But who's to say it doesn't happen? Stranger things have happened. But this is me making an argument for Conference USA as a 2-bid league. They've outperformed. They really have, from what I've seen so far. The top half is doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're winning these tournaments that they're playing in. Louisiana Tech won their MTE. I'm forgetting what the name of that tournament was. And Liberty looks like they're about to go on and win the Paradise Jam there with the likes of McNeese State and Kansas State. And and then MTSU finishes second in a tournament they were supposed to finish in 5th. So a lot of promising signs.
Kennesaw State beating Rutgers the other night.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the surprise team as well, Kennesaw State, I think they're out to a 6-1 start as well. And again, the reason they're not really showing up on Ken Palm's radar is a small sample size. History kind of plays into that a little bit. So who's to say that the Conference USA doesn't find a way to get there? So exciting times. Again, I think I've been super impressed in the early going. But I look forward to seeing what we can do with the rest of this away. Oliver, kind of a bidding due here before we hang up. What are you looking forward to in these last couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, Conference USA, to be honest, I've been pessimistic the last couple of years just because they were so much of what made them good was milked to the AAC, but they've bounced back well. I mean, Sam Houston State's right there too. It's gonna be a tough game, tough season. It'd be special to see one of these teams go on a kind of one bid or an at-large bid run. It'd be cool. It'll be tough. I mean, it's still kind of the round robin schedule where you're playing everybody twice. You got to go to everybody's home gym. That'll make it difficult. And Liberty, they definitely addressed what they needed in the transfer portal last year, and I do think they're revamped. I think they'll be even stronger for us this year. I do still kind of wonder if they're 1 year away from kind of conquering the turf, because the conquering the curve of this a true mid-major. Atlantic Sun is kind of lower fringe mid-major. If you remember last year, they went on quite a non-conference run too, and then it just kind of all took a left turn when they entered Conference USA play. So we'll see. I mean, there could be like 4 or 5 teams getting that automatic bid this year, and I wouldn't be surprised. So it's going to be fun. Looking forward to just another good couple weeks of non-conference, and then the grind of league play is going to be very interesting this year for sure.
Absolutely. Well, that is Oliver Baltz, the basketball analyst for us over at gomiddle.com. Oliver, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, talk hoops. I plan to talk again before conference season starts, so we look forward to having you on then.
Yeah, man, we're going to be celebrating this upset win in Thompson Bowling Arena against the Volunteers. We're going to be going crazy up in here, so it'll be lots of fun.
That's right. That's the plan, right?
Yeah. But thanks for having me on, Jake. You're the best in the game doing this. It's always awesome talking ball with you, and looking forward to the next time for sure.
The BRP is proudly partnered with Rivals Network affiliate GoMiddle.com. Subscribe for premium content for all the inside scoop on MTSU athletics, recruiting, or join our free forums to discuss today's episode and all things Blue Raiders. The BRP is also partnered with the College Huddle, a nationwide collaborative effort with over 80 Division I programs represented. Check out the website at thecollegehuddle.com to catch up on all college football content with daily articles and episodes provided by the largest college podcast community on the internet. As always, we like to go behind enemy lines. In today's episode, it is our grand finale of the regular season for both programs, as MTSU will go to Miami at Pitbull Stadium and take on the FIU Golden Panthers this Saturday. And joining us is another fellow member of the Conference USA Roundtable. It is co-host of the Paws Up Podcast. It is Jake Gibson. Jake, how's it going?
Hi, Jake. It's going great. As you'd mentioned, it's the last week of the regular season for college football, and honestly, it feels a little bittersweet. You know, I love college football just as much as you, and the average college football fan. It just I think it takes too long to get here, and then when it does, it flies by. Like just the other day, we were getting hyped for week 1 at Indiana, and now a whole season is just about passed.
That's right. And what a season it's been, not only for us here at Murfreesboro, but likewise for you guys down in Miami. Obviously, the news of Pitbull Stadium is one that just took college football by storm. There's plenty of topics to cover there, but really the big one right now is with your head coach, Mike McIntyre. 2 weeks ago, following that loss, he kind of had some comments about the program, the state of the program when he got there. And he's kind of had a history lesson over the last couple of weeks. And then the loss this last Saturday against Kennesaw State. I'm curious to know, what is the temperature like on Coach Mack's seat right now?
It's just like the weather here for most of the year. It's very hot and a little humid. It's not great. The fact of the matter is that it's been back-to-back 4-8 seasons for head coach Mike McIntyre prior to this year, and we had the expectation that it's either bowl game or bust for this season. Kevin and I had high hopes prior to this year beginning, that FIU had a lot of favorable matchups both in the non-con and in CUSA, taking on teams like UTEP and Kennesaw State, and the Panthers have just fallen flat. Usually we've been able to fall back to injuries, which last year we were kind of plagued by them. And obviously in Coach Mac's first year, he had to take over the reins of a program that was down in the dumps, with an 0-5 and 1-11 season under our previous head coach, Butch Davis. But the comments made by head coach Mike McIntyre in the Tuesday presser about the history of FIU football drew ire. His apology was seen by some to be not genuine. And then when a former player, Reggie Peterson, came out and talked about a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes with Coach Mike McIntyre, and from this is verbatim from him, the manipulation, the lying about NIL and playing time, throwing a chair at a player during halftime against FAU back in 2022, questioning religion, and a couple of other things. It's only added fuel to the fire, to the point now where, the damage has been done. When FIU football posted the final score graphic following their loss to Kennesaw, the majority of the comments were talking about that Mike McIntyre needs to go. And even now, they posted about Jonnu Smith's performance for the Dolphins on Sunday. He is an FIU Panther. They're Miami's tight end, and it still redirects to that, talking about how Mike McIntyre is not the right guy for this program. And unfortunately, with the way this season has gone, it hasn't really helped his case. And obviously, the fans are subject to whatever they want to believe. We'll see what happens if they lose to Middle Tennessee at home on Senior Day. I will say I will find it very difficult for them to not pull the plug on Coach Mac after all is said and done.
Well, that sounds like that's quite a bit of motivation, at least from Coach Mac's perspective. And that leads me into my next question about this Saturday's matchup. Neither one of us, going into the preseason, I had the expectation that FIU and MTSU would both be at 5 wins, and we'd be looking for both of us to get to bowl eligibility. Coach Mac, as you already said, on his make or break season, and then for us, I thought, it'd be Coach Mason's first opportunity for a bowl eligibility, but the season hasn't panned out that way for either one of us. So let me turn it to you now, and we've kind of had to answer this question the last couple of weeks, but you guys more so recently than us. What do you look forward to? What is something to anticipate for this last home matchup?
Definitely some of the wildest playbooks on both offense and defense, like some interesting play calling that we haven't seen for the majority of this season. We kind of got a little taste of that against Jacksonville State. That one flea flicker that was successful was just out of this league as far as an FIU offensive scheme. But I'm also interested to see how many freshmen get the nod at certain positions on both offense and defense, to see what they could bring to this FIU program next season. We've already seen that to an extent with their running back, Devontae Lyons, who is a freshman who got meaningful snaps for the first time against Jacksonville State, and he's impressed so far. He's come the closest to any running back FIU has this season to get to 100 yards in a single game, which has not happened yet this season. Last week against Kennesaw, Lions ended up with 99, which was very unfortunate. But yeah, I'm interested to see how much freshmen they throw around there, just to see what they have alongside some of the veteran players that this FIU squad has. And I know, obviously, I do believe the players will play for Coach Mac, and they'll want to obviously add to their highlight reel against a Middle Tennessee team who will be doing pretty much the same thing. So it should lead to a great matchup here down at Pitbull Stadium.
Let's dig in a little bit to the FIU Golden Panthers. One name that has stood out to me, especially in the middle of last season, but going into this preseason, someone that could potentially be a surprise candidate, at least for Conference USA Player of the Year, maybe a dark horse, if you will, was Keon Jenkins. Had a fantastic freshman campaign, and really the sophomore campaign, albeit the yards are going to be relatively the same after this Saturday. He's going to end up probably somewhere in that 2,300, 2,400 ballpark, but the touchdowns have gone up, the interceptions have gone down, the completion percentage has gone up. He's been fighting a little bit of an injury bug there in the middle of the year, but gosh, how impressive is Jenkins?
He's electric. He has become one of the faces of the FIU football brand, and for good reason. He's a local hometown kid. Went to Miami Central. He was a star there, and he's leaning towards becoming a star here at the 305. As you had mentioned, he's become a lot more accurate with his passes this year, avoiding the silly plays, avoiding the costly turnovers. Unfortunately, he did throw that interception against Kennesaw last Saturday to seal the game. But aside from that, he's been when the offense has relied on him to make big plays, especially to some of his favorite receivers and Eric Rivers and Dean Patterson, he's been able to do that. And a part of that is because of the talent that Jenkins has. And again, he's only a sophomore, so hopefully he stays in Miami, stays as a Panther. Obviously, you never know with the transfer portal, but assuming he stays here and can develop his talent as a junior and maybe even a senior, then I think he's already making a case to be one of the best quarterbacks FIU's very young program has had. I mean, you have players like Alex Magoo, who had great success with the Birmingham Stallions. But no, I'm very excited to see what Jenkins, how his game can develop. Unfortunately, a big part of this has to come because sometimes Jenkins needs to go out and make the big plays because the running game, I think so far this season, that's almost over. The running game this season has been very underwhelming considering the talent that I think the position has with players like Keyshawn Owens, Lexington Joseph, and Shamari Lawrence. You bring in Devontae Lyons now. I mean, you have I would say 4 very solid running backs, but like I had mentioned, they still have yet to have a 100-yard single game running back this season, which has been very disappointing the way that's gone. But I think Jenkins, I think he's got to be up there, maybe top 3, maybe even 2 in quarterbacks in CUSA, and from a transfer portal perspective, he's going to have a lot of eyes on him all around the G5 and maybe even P4 level. But obviously, as a fan of FIU and as a fan of Jenkins, we've had him on our show as well. We hope he stays, and we hope he just continues to impress and improve his stats as the seasons go by here at FIU.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Jenkins is definitely a top 3 Conference USA, and you could even make the argument that he'd be top 2, I think, there along with Tyler Huff, but it all depends on what kind of day it is. But a big part of his success is those 2 wide receivers that you alluded to. You got Eric Gaines, who leads Conference USA, the lone 1,000-yard receiver this year. Dean Patterson, who I think we thought might be the wide receiver 1, but Eric Gaines has kind of blown up on the scene this year. Talk about those 2 weapons that he's got.
Yeah, Eric Rivers, man, just the season he's had has been nothing short of spectacular. He already has the most single season receiving touchdowns in FIU history with 11 and counting. We'll see what he does on Saturday. But that duo of Eric Rivers and Dean Patterson has been a very difficult wide receiver duo that defenses have had to go up against this season. And when you have an accurate passer like Jenkins, especially throwing down the field, Eric Rivers has been such a beast as far as catching the long ball. It seems like every game they're almost guaranteed to have one drop on the deep ball between Jenkins and Eric Rivers, but the next is almost always a guarantee that he's going to catch it. And he's fast, he has great hands, and even when they start to double team Rivers, you have Dean Patterson, who's one of the more experienced players in that receiving room, not to mention a great return man as well. That's just a very talented wide receiver who I'd argue has been one of the best in G5 for what he's been able to do as a Panther.
Another topic that I think is weird, if that's the right word to use, for lack of a better word, about the FIU team in general is the defense, because they've had their peaks, they've had their valleys. When you look back at the schedule, your week 1 game against Indiana where you held them to 31, I say held them to 31 because that's one of the best scoring offenses in the country, minus what we saw this last week against Ohio State. So 31 was incredible to come out the gates, but then you've got your Central Michigan game, you've got your Monmouth game, but then you've got your low-scoring games with Sam Houston. That was rather impressive, and even holding Jacksonville State to 34, in my opinion, is still a pat on the back. And so the peaks and the valleys, I really want to talk about the peaks that FIU has. What is that defense doing well when they are having those good games?
Oh, I forgot to mention, by the way, FIU has been kind of a wide receiver university as of late, producing talent like Chris Mitchell, who obviously is now with Notre Dame, Tyrese Chambers, who I believe went to Maryland in the Big Ten, and obviously probably our most famous alum from FIU football being T.Y. Hilton, NFL Pro Bowler. Had a great career in Indianapolis. But FIU's defense, when they're playing their best, they can cause havoc in the secondary. They can create a lot of turnovers, as they did against Central Michigan when they had 5 in a single game. And they can just limit offenses, as passing offenses, as well as any G5 team can, such as when they limited New Mexico State to, I believe, 30 passing yards total in that game here at Pitbull Stadium. So their secondary, when they're best, can be one of the deadliest in all of G5, let alone CUSA. And then you have a player like Travion Barnes in the linebacker room, who I believe still has a shot at the most assisted tackles in a single season with FIU football that he has a chance to break in this game against Middle Tennessee. I don't know the exact number, but it is manageable for a player like him. And then you just have some dogs up in the front, such as players like Jeremy Passmore and Giovanni Davis, who have had some solid seasons. Overall, the best that FIU's defense can limit some of the best playmakers in Conference USA, like Caden Salter for Liberty, and then Jacksonville State's basically Jacksonville State's entire offense. The way they were able to sort of contain them in the first half in that game against the Gamecocks a couple of weeks ago, it kind of got out of hand in the second half there. But the defense can be reliable, and it leads to complementary football, which leads to FIU's offense, you having great field position, and Jenkins and the entire group there putting up really good numbers in games such as Central Michigan. Even the Monmouth game, which they ultimately didn't end up winning, the offense did look good, and the New Mexico State game.
Well, the biggest storyline for this Saturday's matchup, aside from the fact we talk about Coach Mack and all those storylines, but the real storyline I think that at least I'm keeping eyes on is the fact that as you already made a testament to, FIU is the best passing defense in Conference USA. MTSU is narrowly behind Western Kentucky as the second best passing offense. So it's going to be a battle of MTSU's offense versus FIU's defense. Yeah. If you could give yourself the keys to the game for the Golden Panthers this Saturday, what do they need to do to win?
I would say just play their style of football to the best they can. I would say a big one is to avoid silly penalties. I say that because in that game against Kennesaw, which FIU lost, there was this spectacular catch by Eric Rivers in the back of the end zone that was taken off because of a holding penalty, and that was tragic. They had settled for a field goal. I believe it was the first drive of the game for FIU. A similar situation occurred in the Jacksonville State game as well. So just avoid silly penalties, and for Kewan Jenkins specifically, keep avoiding the staying off the interception stat line, which he's done pretty well. And I really want to see an FIU running back just have one hell of a day, get over that 100-yard threshold, and just see more of a balanced offense between both passing and rushing, instead of how it's been pretty much the majority of the season, where it's been a pass first, run second kind of system. And then defensively, if you can get to Middle Tennessee's very good offense, they have a great passing game there. So it's going to be, like you had mentioned, a very tough challenge, maybe one of the toughest challenges that this secondary will see this entire season. But if they're up to it, then it's going to be one heck of a battle. And obviously it's going to be senior day for FIU. So they're going to be playing with their hearts out, and they might be playing for Coach Mack as well, because obviously his future there, just like many of the players here graduating or with the transfer portal, is not certain. So they'll want to play for the fans who will still show up to Pitbull Stadium and support the Panthers. It's obviously has not been the season any of us have wanted. Kevin and I, we predicted that before the season began, a 7-5 record, good enough for a bowl game. Johnny went wild. He went 10-2, and I'm like, all right, Johnny. But I'm just hoping that for as bad as this season has unfortunately gotten with all the one-score losses that FIU has had to face, that they can at least end on a high note and go back to back to back years with a 4-8 instead of my first 3-9 record.
Well, I'm certain the playbooks will be wide open this Saturday at Pitbull Stadium. Again, that kickoff is at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time for those here in Murfreesboro, viewable on ESPN+. That is Jake Gibson. He is the co-host of the Paws Up Podcast. Jake, one last thing before we finish up the call here, because I love what you guys do. You and Kevin both do a lot of stuff over there at Paws Up Podcast, Lemon City Live. You guys cover everything. So for any of our crossover listeners that are about getting into the Conference USA stuff, maybe outside of the roundtable, but getting more into the FIU stuff, where can they find your stuff?
Yeah, so me personally, my handle for both X, Twitter, Instagram, etc. is at Jake the MC. Aside from covering FIU and the Paws Up Podcast, I also cover the Miami Dolphins, the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, as well as NASCAR at Homestead Miami Speedway. And then you can follow the Paws Up Podcast on pretty much every platform at Paws Up Podcast. We have a lot of fun with the work we do. We've surpassed over 70 episodes since starting just about 2 years ago. And we've had a lot of amazing guests on our show, current and former players and coaches from FIU athletics, not to mention some famous alumni, even the president of FIU himself, Dr. Kenneth Jessel, not that long ago. It's been a lot of fun, and we keep continuing to grow the show, especially being part of the CUSA Podcast Roundtable and even the College Huddle, which both of us are also in. So, just be sure to follow us on any platform you desire at Paws Up Podcast.
They do great stuff over there for Blue Raider listeners that are all about getting all the Conference USA media. Great production they do as well. So, Jake, I appreciate you taking the time, and best of luck to you guys this Saturday.
Thank you, Jake. I got to say that Jake to Jake connection, it's pretty fire. Paws up. Dale.
Thanks for sticking around to the Raider wrap-up portion of the episode where we will review the last week in Blue Raider athletics as well as a look ahead to this week's schedule for all things Middle Tennessee. We will kick things off with where last week started, and that is the Lady Raiders at home against the Tennessee Tech Golden Eagles. They won that contest by a score of 69-52. The player of the week, or the game rather, would go to Jalen Gregory, who had 20 points in that game, 10 of which came from a perfect 10 of 10 free throw shooting night at the line. She also had 5 rebounds and 4 assists, and very excited to see her get her shooting legs underneath her as we move into this much anticipated week with the 3 contests all in Florida beginning today at 11 a.m. That is viewable on ESPN+. The Lady Raiders are on the road at Florida A&M University, home of the Lady Rattlers. They will be facing this SWAC opponent once again. Should be a relatively easy one, but obviously you take this game as an opportunity to fine-tune some things before you go into this much-anticipated Thanksgiving weekend matchup. They are in Fort Myers, Florida, as a part of these 2 Power 4 games. The one on Thursday on Thanksgiving at 3:30 p.m. local time will be against Purdue, and then they will have the off day on Friday, and then on Saturday they will be facing the top 10 Iowa State, which, as I'm recording this, don't know where they fall in the new AP poll after being upset last week to Northern Iowa, but Iowa State has looked very beatable this last week, and they will be facing off against the Lady Cyclones this Saturday, the 30th, and that is at 12:30 p.m. local time as well. Both of those games are viewable on the Women's Sports Network. I'm not entirely positive on how those are viewable, if that is a subscription-based service or not, but I will definitely be digging into it. And as always, follow us on our social media accounts to make sure that you don't miss where those games are viewable at. But big week for the Lady Raiders. Obviously an opportunity to get some P4 wins as well as get a big one against Iowa State on a neutral floor this weekend. So all the eyes will be turned to Florida on the Lady Raiders this week. So again, they get things started off today at 11 a.m. on ESPN+ against the Florida A&M Lady Rattlers. Men's tennis had their national championship this last weekend. For us, it was just the doubles of Kareem Al-Almin and Andre Horak. That doubles pairing got a rather unlucky draw where they faced the number 2 overall seed from Baylor. They took them all the way to the wire, though. It took them to the third and final set where they dropped that tiebreaker 10-8. So it was a really good battle for Al-Almin and Horak, which is very promising sign given that the The spring schedule was just released this last week, and I'll go ahead and tease that first matchup there where they do host top 10 opponent number 7 in the country, Tennessee. That's right there. The Vols are coming to Murfreesboro to kick off the season. That'll actually be at the Adams Indoor Tennis Complex. It's not until January 16th, so you got more than enough time to prepare for that. But I want to congratulate and Al Amin for their fall, as well as their being able to compete at the national championships. It doesn't go unnoticed, but we look forward to what this team can do as they look to repeat as Conference USA champions once again in a very, very tough schedule. So, as always, we'll have Coach Borndame on at some time prior to the season to touch base with him, see what all things are going on with tennis. But big congratulations again to Al Amin and Orak, and we look forward to their season starting in mid-January against the Volunteers at the Adams Tennis Complex. Men's basketball, we spent a lot of time talking about men's basketball, so briefly, their 2-1 trip there to the Myrtle Beach Invitational with their wins over Ohio and South Florida. And then, of course, they lost the championship game on Sunday to Bradley by a score of 69-80. They will be back in action this week, but it'll be a long wait until Sunday where they play at Birmingham against the Blazers, our old Conference USA opponents, a team that was picked to win the American Athletic Conference at the beginning of the year ahead of Memphis. Surprisingly enough, they haven't looked the part thus far, but that doesn't mean anything, as this time of year anything can really happen, especially on the road for the Raiders too. Again, coming off of a neutral site, I would say relatively good weekend. You hope that you can keep that momentum going as you go to UAB, a team that has looked up and down to say the least early in the going. So you want to get that win, revenge that loss you had last year in the early season. Very tight game that one was as well. But again, that is this Sunday, the 1st, and that is at 3 p.m. viewable on ESPN+. Lady Raiders volleyball had their season come to an end on Friday of this last week, where they lost the first round of the Conference USA tournament to Kennesaw State. Again, another very close battle with the Lady Owls. It took them all the way to the 5th set and unfortunately fell there by a set score of 2-3. So that concludes the Lady Raiders season, barring any sort of postseason invitation. I wouldn't imagine that it happens, but I'd never rule those kind of things out because I'm not too privy to what the postseason looks like for a lot of those volleyball tournaments at the end of the year. But you finish 9-9 in conference. They're very young altogether as a core, so a lot to be excited about for their future. I did want to give one final Player of the Week honor to Audrey Rhoda, who tied her career high once again with 26 kills against Kennesaw State in that Friday matchup. So a big season for her as she earned All-Conference USA team as well. Again, they bring back some of these core players. Again, albeit that they do return, it looks bright for where volleyball is headed in the future. Football lost their senior day game on Saturday to New Mexico State by a score of 21-36. I give my Player of the Week to Jakael Middlebrooks, who had 80 yards on 10 carries, and he also had 5 receptions on 29 yards, over 109 yards of total offense for the freshman. A really impressive game for him altogether, and really for the rushing attack in general. You go into the game facing a New Mexico State team who is known for running the football, and we outgained them on the ground, 170-145. We even beat them in the passing category. When you look at these stats, if those of you that are viewing this on YouTube, you'll see that we'll win a lot of these categories of statistics when you compare them head to head. But the big glaring one that we didn't win was a turnover battle, 2-0. And you spotted New Mexico State with a touchdown right out the gate with a pick 6. It's really hard to bounce back from that, especially when you didn't score the ensuing drive. They go down and makes it 10-0 right off the bat. So very unfortunate loss. I don't want to harp on it too much because really there's not necessarily too much to play for in this last week with FIU because they too are also out of bowl eligibility, as we just spoke with Jake Gibson of the Paws Up Podcast. But getting some of these new guys a lot more reps, like we saw with Jakael Middlebrook this last week, is very promising signs. You hope a lot of these young core guys are getting these necessary snaps to continue improving, getting those extra, taking the time to actually appreciate these extra practices that they have at the end of the year, knowing that they have playing time coming up. So, but all eyes for that final game coming up this Saturday, the 30th, that is in Miami. That kicks off at 1 p.m. and will be viewable on ESPN+. And I'll go ahead and tease that in a couple weeks, it'll be National Signing Day for football. That is on December 3rd, which we will have an episode released that day. However, we will not be talking National Football Signing Day due to the recording time of it. But that next week on the 10th, we will be doing a roundtable with a lot of the Go Middle football analysts to talk about the signing class that's coming up on December 3rd. So keep your eyes peeled for that episode if you want to get all the insight onto the upcoming signing class, because this is a very big deal for Derek Mason in his second year. And of course, our guys at Go Middle do a fantastic job of keeping tabs on that signing class. So if you want to be in the know about this upcoming recruiting class for football, I encourage you to stay tuned on social media for that December 10th episode with those guys, where we will talk everything you could possibly want to know about this 2025 signing class. Lastly, Alan Kiplagat competed at the cross-country national championships this last week. He finished 19th out of 255 competitors at the national championship. A lot to be said for the young man and his trip there. So again, hats off to him. And then as far as the cross-country / track and field season goes, they will not have anything on the docket until their indoor season starts up soon. So, of course, keep tuned for whenever that schedule does finally release. And that will do it for the Raider wrap-up portion of the episode, where we go over this last week in Blue Raider athletics. I appreciate everyone tuning in. And as I teased at the very beginning of the episode, unfortunately, Jalen Counter was not able to join this episode today due to unforeseen circumstances for the game this last week, where he had an injured leg, but thankfully everything's all right. He'll be able to join us for next week's episode. So a lot of insight from him, not only on the injury front, but as well as his transfer time here. Very excited to have Jalen join us, and as well as a lot of your Raiders' favorite, we'll have Chip Walters joining the show to talk all things basketball as the Lady Raiders return from Fort Myers. Of course, a little bit of basketball update from the UAB game, and of course, we'll put a nice little bow on the football season with Mr. Walters as well. But again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button. I would appreciate it a ton. Give the video a like, share this on all of your socials, tag your friends, let them know the Blue Raider podcast is rolling strong. We're closing in on our 1-year anniversary, and I appreciate everyone that has tuned in thus far for all things Blue Raider athletics, but of course, plenty of more content coming for you in the future, with basketball really ramping up, and of course, as we move into spring season. So I'm excited. Again, I appreciate everyone tuning into today's episode. Follow us on our social media accounts on Twitter /X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course on YouTube at Blue Raider Pod. And don't miss us for that big one next week with Jalen Counter and Chip Walters. And until next time, go Blue.